We love supporting and promoting the creators of musical theater throughout the world, and we would love to have your support as well. Go to musicaltheaterradio.com and click on the Become a Patron button because a supportive community is a strong community. Welcome back to another episode of Be Our Guest here on Musical Theater Radio. I am your host, as always, Jean-Paul Yovanov. When I say our next guest can do it all, it sounds like a bit of a hyperbole, but I think our next guest might come pretty close to achieving this. She is the producer of the musicals Be More Chill, Broadway Bounty Hunter, and Love and Hate Nation, creative and programming director at Feinstein's 54 Below, author of the Untold Stories of Broadway book series, creator of the Jonathan Larson Project, historian consultant on the film version of Tick, Tick, Boom, and named recipient of the 2020 Lincoln Center Emerging Artist Award, and created something I am very interested in knowing more about. If it only ever even runs a minute. It's a concert series celebrating rare songs from underappreciated musicals, a thing that is close to my heart. The only thing I didn't see was astronaut on their LinkedIn page, but I could have just missed that, and we'll find out if there's an astronaut in there. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to the show Jennifer Ashley Tepper. Jen, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me and for the beautiful introduction.
Well, thank you for writing it on your website. So it makes life so much easier sometimes. But so I know I went through all of that stuff, but we'd like to get to know our guests before we delve into all the deeper stuff. I always ask for a 30-second bio. So who is Jen in 30 seconds?
That's a great question, especially because most of us are like verbose. So I grew up in Boca Raton, Florida, just a very theater obsessed kid who was really fascinated by musical theater history and new writers and old writers. And I feel really lucky that I get to do things like work at 54 Below, work on Broadway, work in all these different capacities to celebrate underappreciated musicals and history and kind of bring all those things I love together.
Wonderful. You have an extra 9 seconds. Is there anything you want to add?
I've never been told that in my life. I'm always like the longest answer.
All right, awesome. So, but again, I always like to take it back. Is your family a theater family, an arts family, or are you kind of the black sheep of the family?
Everyone in my family basically works in medicine, other than my sister and I. My sister's an entertainment attorney now, but everyone loved theater, so it was kind of both. I was taken to a lot of touring musicals in Florida growing up. My dad's like one of those doctors that's always like singing to his patients. It was very much encouraged and very much supported, although no one in my family had ever worked in theater.
Yeah. How useful is it to have an entertainment lawyer in the family?
um, Yes, my sister's amazing. And so her and I are very much like the next generation. Like we went into the arts.
Nice, nice. Did you always want to be in theater growing up, or was there something else you thought about doing? Maybe medicine or something else?
Never thought about that. Wouldn't be good at it. But yeah, I went to theater camp locally when I was 9 years old. And from that point on, it was just like theater, theater, theater. Started like asking for 8 cast albums every Hanukkah, was like never not seeing, either wearing a theater shirt or like listening to CD. It was all of that. And I really never thought about doing much else. I only applied to NYU and I said I would chain myself to my room and just like reapply if I didn't get in forever. So I was very much like New York City or bust.
Well, obviously you got in there because you didn't get chained. You're not chained up still in Florida. So,
To like guidance counselors when I was 18, I was like, I'm just going to chain myself to my bedpost until I get in and I won't apply anywhere else.
Nice. Well, that determination, it helps to get in. What was that process like going up from Boca Raton in Florida up to NYC?
Yeah, so as mentioned, like I was really lucky to see a lot of local theater growing up, but I really only got to visit New York 3 times before I moved there, which is a crazy thing when you think about it for an 18-year-old. I was always so jealous of people who grew up, in Jersey and on Long Island, who really like knew the city better than I did. But I had 3 very like magical trips to New York when I was a teenager, and then they plant you in an NYU dorm. They're like, here's your class schedule, And the city really is your campus. Like it
Yeah.
sounds like a cliche, but I do feel like I learned just as much from, I would get like free tickets, whatever free tickets NYU was offering, I would get. And then I would take notes on multiple performances of shows, like as I was taking advantage of the free tickets. Like I did so many internships. I volunteered at so many theater related functions. I kind of just did whatever I could do to like learn and get in there in the professional theater community while I was at NYU. I did my own shows on campus. It was very much like I didn't go to Gallatin, which is the one where you create your own major. I went to Tisch, but I feel like I did create my own major, through the back door way of doing it.
Nice. So what did you go to Tisch for exactly?
I went to Tisch for dramatic writing, which, I loved theater and I loved writing. I didn't want to be a playwright, but I was like, here's, a department where I can kind of hone my skills in different ways. And it was odd, everyone else there wanted to write the next Big Lebowski or the next, it was a department basically full of like screenwriters.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. I think it actually motivated me more to find my people in terms of like musical theater appreciators. But I did, so one of my hero of heroes is Ted Chapin, who he wrote my favorite theater book, Everything Was Possible, The Birth of Musical Follies. And when I was 20, I wrote him a letter and asked if I could intern for him at the Rodgers and Hammerstein organization, where he was then the head of. And I did. And it was like very, I've been very lucky to be mentored by him in various ways over the years. But my thesis in college, because I was like, I don't actually want to be a screenwriter. Here I am trying to learn about all these different things at NYU. I adapted his book, Everything Was Possible, into a screenplay. That's truly the worst screenplay ever. It's not good. But I ran into him at a Tony Awards event, and we always joke about it. And he's like, I got to see that screenplay. And I'm like, it's been 15 years. We're never going to take it out of the drawer.
Is it one of those lost media things that no one's gonna ever see?
Yes, it
Okay.
was just a lot of me being like, page 7, Michael Bennett walks in. And it was like, it was a very, as a historian and as someone who supports writers and supports new musicals and new works, it's like, it was a very helpful exercise, but it's like, it was just bad. So glad I did it. Glad I learned from it.
Well, that's the thing, right? Even if something isn't great, you learn from it, right? And you grow, so that it makes sense. Did you
Totally.
ever want to be on stage?
I loved doing it at summer camp and in high school, but I never thought it was going to be a career. I was always one of those people who like was so excited to be part of a cast and like loved all the rituals that go along with like, being in an ensemble of a musical. Like my high school did for I went to a like public high school, but that had a ton of money for the theater department because we were near every retirement home in South Florida and had an incredible drama teacher who would like have them all buy tickets. So by the time I went there, it was like we were doing 8 shows in our 1,000-seat theater, and like we had all this spend money. I mean, like, we spent the money on like sets and costumes, and we did 42nd Street, and we all had free tap lessons for an entire year. So yeah, it was like a really cool place to be, and I loved being part of that. And I participated in things like thespians, which were my life. But once I got to college, I wasn't like, oh, I want to perform. But I always did love being like hosting events and talking about nerdy musical theater facts and stuff like that from the stage. So I was excited to like speak publicly, but not be, an actor.
Wow, your high school is 42nd Street. I think my high school barely could get people enough together to do Little Shop, which only has like 9 people. But wow, that's incredible. That's very cool. So once you graduated from Tisch, where did you go from there? Jennifer in the
Well,
world of New York.
yeah, I was super lucky in that I had again like all these internships, most of which were not internship programs, but like working for people who I wrote to myself. And I was really lucky that I interned with the writers of Title of Show, the
Mm,
musical. That show was off Broadway while I was in college, and I like was obsessed with it. All of my fellow NYU students were obsessed with it, and I wrote to the writers and I invited them to a project that I was doing that we hoped to include some material from Title of Show in. And that didn't quite work out because the music was still being published, but we stayed in touch. And basically, they were, back in 2008, 2007, actually, they were really the first Broadway show to be like, we're going to make a web series. It was
mhm.
before the era of like everyone has a YouTube show.
Yeah.
And so their web series was like, here's how we're going to Broadway, and this is our path to Broadway. And they hired me as their assistant to help them with all those videos, which meant I did everything from like, fetch this shirt for Cheyenne Jackson to like help us rewrite this part of, the episode. So I spent a year doing that, and then title of show actually ended up going to Broadway the summer after I graduated college. So Michael Buress, the director, hired me as his assistant for like, so I had a real position on the show when it moved to the Lyceum, which was like the greatest, most surreal experience ever. It was it inspired my books. It inspired If It Only Runs Minute. It was just like this incredible, incredible time. And after that, I really spent at least a year and a half, if not 2 years, applying for so many jobs I didn't get, and like doing the like New York City hustle of like babysitting and tutoring and PAing a workshop for 1 week and assisting this person for a week and then going back to babysitting. It was a lot of New York City, post NYU grad hustle, before I had my first like full-time theater job, which was working for Ken Davenport.
Nice. And what did you do with Ken and in New York?
Yeah, so I worked for Ken for 3 years in his office, and I was the director of marketing and promotions. And it was so great to work for a producer. Like all I ever wanted was to work for a Broadway producer at that
Mhm.
point, because I thought that would be such a great next step for me. And we did the thing we did that was like the most memorable and took up the most time was we did the Broadway revival of Godspell. So it ran at Circle in the Square, and I got to be involved with everything. That office, and Ken is amazing because he does everything in house. Especially, I can speak to what he did then, but everything from like marketing to general management to artistic development to casting. It was like so many things were happening in that office, and Godspell was really like his baby. So I learned about every element of like that production as we put it together, and it was really like that was very cool too. So I was there for 3 years before I started working at 54 Below.
Nice. Well, then let's talk about 54 Below, because as someone in the theater scene who lives in Toronto, you hear about it, but you don't until you go to it or you talk to people who've been. You just hear about it. So, tell us a little bit about 54 Below, what it is, and then how you got involved with it.
Sure. So 54 Below is Broadway's Supper Club. That's our little subtitle. And this year's our 10th anniversary year. So we've been open for 10 years on 54th Street, right underneath the good old Studio 54. And basically, I've been there for about 9 years. So I'll tell you what it is and how I came on board. The owners of 54 Below are Broadway producers who they became really excited about the idea of like an old fashioned supper club that brought like new Broadway talent, older Broadway talent, had really nice fine dining. It wasn't like, oh, you're going to see your friend do a concert or cabaret and you're eating pretzels. It was like a really wonderful dining experience. And they opened it in 2012, and I came on board in 2013. Their original programming director was a man, Phil Bond, who I knew through doing concerts at the Beachman. I produced a lot of If It Only Runs Minute shows and shows with Joe Iconis, who I still work with. And Phil was the director there and had worked with me. And so when 54 Below was looking for a new programming director, he recommended me. And we also had just done the Joe Iconis Christmas show, which has about 80 cast members, is like this crazy, insane show with, dozens of Christmas characters and snow and just like things flying at your face. I had just produced it at 54 Below the first year that it was open. So they knew who I was, and they were like, "Oh yeah, bring in that girl who produced that crazy show. If that's who you're recommending, great." So that was how I became involved. And what was really insane was that it was 2013, which was the year that I wrote my first book, The Untold Stories of Broadway. And so I always just call it like it was 3 months where I don't think I ever slept because I was still at my old job. I was
Yeah.
starting to run 54 Below, and I was working on a book for the first time, which had like a very clear due date and also involved like interviews, and it was such a crazy time. But yeah, so I've been at 54 Below since 2013. It's really crazy that it's our 10th anniversary year, and we just were very lucky to be awarded the special Tony honor this year.
Oh, nice. Well, congratulations on that. That's fantastic. So, how does it work? Because again, I'm trying to picture it, but until I get down there and actually experience it. So you said it's a supper club. So is yeah? Please describe. I can't even figure out how it works.
Yeah, so we do right now we do two shows a night. Pre-pandemic it was three, but we'll
Mhm.
forget about that for now.
Yeah.
But so we do two shows every night, at 7 and 9:30, which are almost always two totally different shows.
Huh.
Meaning that we do 14 shows a week, meaning that we do, 700 plus shows a year. And basically our schedule is shaped around our headliners who play the week. So for example, like next week it'll be Brian Stokes Mitchell at 7 p.m. all week, and at 9:30, it's exciting stuff like new writers, new musicals, performers who are just getting started, or different kinds of creative
Mhm.
combinations of basically at 7 p.m. we have our like higher ticket price demographic, and at 9:30 we can charge a little less and bring in a little younger audiences or a different demographic.
Yeah.
So usually it's that, but there's so many variations. We've done like hundreds of obscure musicals in concert. We do nights that are like 54 sings Britney Spears or 54 sings Irving Berlin, like everything in between. There's so much that like I made a bunch of lists of like our different categories of shows with what shows were in that category for our 10th anniversary. And there were so many that fit no category. It's like you look at the 54 Below calendar, you're like, oh, there's an 18-piece big band. And, there's a show where they're recreating Murder, She Wrote. And, there's a show where it's, Audra McDonald and Will Swenson. It's really like just so many different things, but all centered around the Broadway community. So it's almost always Broadway artists or Broadway centric in some way, with fun variations every so often.
That'd be so exciting to see. Just yeah, like you said, the variation of so much different stuff you could go in and see in the same day. You know, like you said, Brian Stokes, Mitchell, and then this rare, maybe Scandinavian musical that they're in New York trying to workshop or something. It's just it's
Totally.
it's very cool that way. I'd love to know some of the 7 o'clock people. We'll just call them the headliners, and then maybe some of the people that you saw for the first time at the 9:30 slot, and you've watched grow and make it.
Sure. There have been so many. What's crazy is like there are so many collaborations, people who are like, oh, I'm working with this musical director for the first time, at 54 Below. And then I like see a couple years later, that's their musical director for their show that's coming to Broadway. There's so many first collaborations.
Yeah,
There's everyone from like Ariana DeBose was doing shows in the basement when she was not like, barely on Broadway.
yeah.
Ben Platt did his own show at 54. Like, tickets were $40. He was just getting started out. Bonnie Milligan's a big one who, like, her star is on the rise, and she has done a million things for years at 54 Below. Our 7 p.m. artists are, also diverse in terms of like what material they do and all kinds of other things, age, race, gender.
Mhm.
But it is all shaped around the ticket prices being higher at 7. So yeah, there's such a big list at this point. Some of our big ones, Patti LuPone. We have Jennifer Holliday coming up, which is really exciting. Jeremy Jordan. There's honestly just so many. In this next like couple months, in addition to Stokes, let me see, who do we have coming up? Emily Skinner, who's someone like I've loved forever, Lucy Arnaz. We have Kate Baldwin and Aaron Lazar just did a very acclaimed production of Bridges of Madison County out of
Mhm.
town, and they're doing a duo show. So
Oh.
sometimes we get to kind of like reunite people to do something they might not have gotten to see in New York. So yeah, it's a different headliner every week, and we are always like bringing new headliners into the fold.
What's the size of the house? Like, what's the capacity?
It's about 140.
That's nice and intimate. Like,
Yeah,
wow.
it's like you're watching Jason Robert Brown and you're literally 2 feet away from him. You're not even 6 feet away. You're like right on top of the piano.
Wow, that's incredible. Um, yeah, I think anybody who's in New York and is in love with musical theater and wants to discover or just, get in depth, definitely check that out. I'd love to know more about your producing because you said you were with Ken and you learned about the producing. How did you get on to Be More Chill and those other shows?
Yeah, so I when I was just a like NYU student slash young 20 something starting out, I was so in love with Joe Iconis's work. I discovered it like on a demo tape in a back office at the York Theater when I interned there when I was 19 years old, and was like, who is this guy who's writing these songs? Like I have to go to see one of his concerts or find out who he is. And I was so into like his work and was just like honestly a fan. Like I have like a fangirl picture with him from before we ever really met. And then one of our producers on Title of Show was actually producing a show of Joe Iconis's, and I was like can I be a gopher? Can I get coffee? Like, can I just, do the thing? And so I got to assist on Things to Ruin, which is a show of Joe's that now has a cast recording and is licensed, but it was being done at Second Stage. And I really got to know him and his whole like family of artists. And from that point on, have worked with him in so many capacities, like whether it's producing a Broadway show or, dramaturging a show out of town or, producing his shows at 54 Below. We spent years just trying, to get anywhere together. It's like we did a number of like off Broadway shows, out of town tryouts. Be More Chill was a very unique situation where, the show was at Two River in New Jersey, the wonderful Two River Theater, and it sadly got a not great review in the New York Times, and so no one was interested in moving it anywhere, basically. And I've been in that situation multiple times with Joe, and know from having friendships with many new writers, it's pretty standard where the show, everyone was really proud of it, felt really good about it. The New York Times review comes out, and everyone literally canceled their tickets. Like the next morning, it was like every producer who was even getting on a train to New Jersey, because you can't sell tickets without that New York Times review if you're a new musical like that, and unless you can get a nonprofit on board or a commercial producer. So it really was dead in the water, and there were these really wonderful donors at Two River Theater, Bob and Joan Recknitz, who spent $100,000 to say, we're going to record this, cast album, regardless of what happens with the show. We're giving all the money so that this show can be remembered, and hopefully it'll get licensed someday, and whatever happens, like we're letting it get recorded. And that recording, sat around for like a year or two before like people started discovering it, and it got wrapped up in what's now, kind of known as like the algorithm. Really, people loved it, and so the internet told more people to listen to it. It was, all the classic Spotify and Apple Music and all of that. And from that, like it gained this crazy audience where once it was actually licensed, partially because we did it in concert at 54 Below a few months after it closed, to be like, well, somebody license this or do it. And it did get licensed. And so there were all these high school productions that like we would hear from high school theater directors who were like, people flew in from Japan to see like this high school production because they just were eager to see any Be More Chill. So it started getting a lot of attention. And this very wonderful producer named Jerry Gehring, who had done the show at in his hometown, he basically wanted to bring it to New York and find a way to do that. And so he and I got connected, and we together were able to produce it off Broadway at the Signature Theater and then on Broadway at the Lyceum. And, like we sold out every single performance at the Signature Theater before we even started performances. Like it was such a wild ride because it had gained that audience. So, it was really exciting to have the opportunity to take all of these connections I'd made for 10 years with Joe, whether it was, a connection I'd made with a potential investor that like when we were able to finally bring a show in, like, I could reach out to, or whether it was, someone we could hire in the music department who'd been doing all of the Joe Iconis concerts for years and now got a Broadway credit. It was so wonderful to kind of bring all of that together. But it was a very, unique circumstance, and nothing like that will happen exactly that way ever again. And yeah, it was a wonderful experience, but it was also certainly, we still did not get a great New York Times review, and like ended up not being able to have a long run because of it. And it just, it was such a unique of its own time moment.
And that's just one more proof that reviews are just, how do you like, I read them and then just take them with a grain of salt, because an opinion, like I don't know how you feel about reviews. Obviously on this one you're not happy with it, but
Yeah,
but
it's just, it's one person's opinion. And certainly there have been like reviewers that I've appreciated because they've showed me what a show was when I wasn't there. I love reading reviews sometimes from, past decades or whatever. But yeah, it's really one person's opinion. But the whole, basically like system of reviews is predicated on us all listening to them. And people do, and even if only half of the audience does, you still can't survive with only half. It's like, it's just such a tricky thing. So it's really, we're so dependent on just a few people's opinions.
I know, I hate when people ask me, well, what did you think of the show? Well, it doesn't matter what I think, honestly. Just go see it and make a decision for yourself. Just support the arts and go see the show. And then,
Totally.
so awesome. Well, congratulations on Be More Chill. It kind of took off just a little bit. So that's, and it's always great to have backers like that couple you mentioned to support the cast recording. It's so important to have benefactors and helpers and
Totally.
create
And
that
it
kind
was really special that, like there were so many people that loved Joe's work or loved the work of other folks that put the show together and spent years hoping that it would go to New York or go to Broadway, not just Be More Chill, but any number of
of.
his shows. And so many of our backers were people like the Recknitzes who had like who knew people involved and who were like very much like emotionally invested in the show.
Nice. Love to talk a little bit about Jonathan Larson. Obviously, you put together the Jonathan Larson Project. You mentioned that you were a consultant on Tick Tick Boom. What is it about Jonathan Larson's work, and how did you get it's so involved with it?
Yeah, I was like a rent obsessed teenager. I was like just maybe old enough right when it came out to sort of appreciate it. But like, all of us like theater kids singing those songs before we really knew what it meant. So I was, I loved his work from a very young age. And I loved Tick Tick Boom as well. Like always loved Rent and Tick Tick Boom, which, came on tour to Florida when I was also in high school. And so when Tick Tick Boom was at Encore City Center, I was part of an artist group that was doing events in the lobby before performances. And I basically pitched if what I did as my event could be this like unheard Jonathan Larson concert where I would put together folks singing a couple of his really lesser known works. So, obviously not from Rent or Tick Tick Boom, but beyond that. And I got permission to do it. And so I did this mini concert before a performance of Tick Tick Boom, which starred Lin-Manuel Miranda, of course, and he, came and watched us do our lobby shenanigans. And from that point, what year was that? Gosh, I think it was 2014. I started talking to the Larson family and the estate about expanding it into a full concert evening. So I spent a couple of years doing research at the Library of Congress and elsewhere in the New York Public Library as well, of all of his, at the Library of Congress, it was like a treasure trove where it was just so many tapes of, things that Jonathan Larson recorded at age 24 in his bedroom that were the equivalent of like a voice memo today,
Yeah.
that no one had ever heard. Like there were songs where I would reach out to, a friend of his or his sister or someone and be like, oh my God, this song. And they would be like, oh yeah, Johnny loved that song and it got performed in this place. And sometimes I would reach out and everyone would be like, we have no idea what that is. So I shortly after I started, I realized I really had to listen to every single song in order to do justice to kind of a new song cycle of his unknown work. And
Yeah.
so it's been a couple years and did the Jonathan Larson Project, which was such a really one of the most incredible creative experiences I've ever had of like creating this new, basically like what would be the new musical theater song cycle Jonathan Larson would have put together if he had done that, if he had been part of our generation that does that. And we got to have a cast album, which has been really exciting. We've been working on some next steps potentially for the show. But Lin-Manuel knew that I had been working on that. And so very early in the Tick Tick Boom film, trajectory, he asked me if I would come on board as a historian to help them work on it from a historic perspective, based on the fact that he knew I already was starting to have all this like mega knowledge from going through the archives.
Wow. So were you on set during it, or was it your process before or during and after? Or how did that work?
I was on set a little bit, but it was so impacted because of COVID. It ended up being a really fun experience where most of my work was definitely like before the movie started. But I got to be an extra in one of the scenes because they were eager to be like, we want you on set, but there are such strict COVID protocols that all these people in these positions are doing remote work from the hotel. And like,
Yeah.
but if you're an extra, we can. So I ended up being an extra. It was very fun, very fun. But yeah, I spent a number of years with Julie O, who's one of the movie's producers, with Lynn, with Stephen Levinson, who wrote the screenplay, kind of talking to them about all kinds of real life events that impacted the show and the story. The show was written by Jonathan to be a one-man musical, and after his death, it was expanded into a three-person musical.
Mm.
And then the movie has, hundreds of characters, so it really expanded the story. And certain things that happened in real life that are referred to in one line in Jonathan's original Tick Tick Boom script might get a whole scene.
Mm.
So it was, like, hey, what would this person's office have looked like? And hey, Jonathan mentions this person. What was his history with that person? And, filling in a lot of the real life details and also sharing material. So I had sessions with each of the actors to say, like, oh, like Andrew Garfield, like here's a song that Jonathan wrote right around the time that is the part of the show you're acting here, or part of the movie, I guess. So such a theater girl, not used to even it being a movie. But I got to meet with the actors as well and give them kind of like supplementary dramaturgical material about their characters. Yeah, it was a lot of like just kind of being the resident theater history nerd. I It's sort of similar to dramaturgy, but it was never, hey, something should happen in this scene because this happened in that scene. It wasn't the parts of dramaturgy that help tell the story in like a structural way. It was more kind of filling in like historic kind of content as we went through the process.
Is there a Jonathan Larson song that people should know that you love and that people might not know but should?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, and the lucky thing was like, I went through so many and ended up with the 18 that are on the Jonathan Larson Project. But there's quite a few. There's one on that album called "Hosing the Furniture" that he won a bunch of fancy musical theater writer awards for at the time, but that was never recorded in his lifetime. And it's like a 8-minute epic about basically a housewife. I'll leave it at that as far as context. But people really know him as kind of having done one sort of music, like for
Mhm.
Rent and for Tick Tick Boom. And it's, he was able to write in a lot of eclectic styles that are not on display there. So I would say that one. But there's also, I mean, our finale of the Jonathan Larson Project was a song called Piano that was not finished. It was a song that was like unfinished. So we performed it sort of unfinished. And it's like an incredibly beautiful song that every time I hear it, I'm just kind of in tears. So there's a lot on that album that I'm super proud of.
Wow, that's very cool. That's very cool. So let's transition then into less known songs from musicals into if it even only runs a minute, because I love, and on our station I play all the popular stuff of course, but playing these obscure shows, because I was looking at your archive list of shows that you perform songs from, I play like 85% to 90, and if I don't play it, it's just because I just don't own it.
I love
um
it. You're doing the good work. Thank
oh
you for doing it for all of
Oh no!
us.
Oh, I love some of this. Like I forget one of the sessions, the concerts had Xanadont and Zombie Prom in it, and a few others. I love those two. That's just like some of my favorite shows. Those two. So I'd love to know how you came up with the concept, and what it was like and what it is.
Yeah, so I should say the title is actually a lyric from Merrily We Roll Along, which is my favorite musical of all time. Which I always think it's funny because, like, there's a revival of Merrily coming back to New York, and every time there's any like significant production of Merrily, I get at least a couple people constantly being like, "Oh, we didn't know that's what all those words were," because there's a part of It's a Hit where they go, "If it only even runs a minute, at least it's a wedge, it's the theater, and we're really in it, not just the edge." So that's where the
Yeah.
long title comes from. But yeah, so it was around that time. It was in 2010 when we started doing it, and our last one was just last year. So we've been doing it for over a decade, this concert series. And my cohort, Kevin Michael Murphy, and I were both, trying to find our place in the musical theater world. And I would post these like huge Facebook albums of like obscure photos that I would cull from like online archives in the New York Public Library, and just be like, don't everyone on my friends list want to look at like this picture of Marilyn and American Fable backstage? It would just be basically like internet nerdery. And we had lunch one day and we're like, how do we turn this into a concert series? And what it turned into was, including the photos, which was really important to us, and having backstage images being backstage production photos, behind the scenes, whatever, being part of the show. And then also having it be a combination of writers and actors who originated work coming to recreate it, and then also new folks interpreting the material. So we've actually, I used to say we've never repeated a musical, but I think we've maybe repeated like 3. And it's always that. It's always like, oh, we already did Smile, but now one of us is friends with so and so from the original cast of Smile. We have to let her come
Yeah.
into Smile. So we've repeated a couple shows, but really we've barely repeated any shows, which has been exciting because it's, almost every edition we have at least one song that's never been recorded that,
Mm.
we get a bootleg and we transcribe it. Like Anthony Rapp was in, I'm sure but like the show that closed in previews, Little Prince and the Aviator.
Mhm.
when he was a kid, he played the Little Prince in that musical. It was never recorded, and he came and sang in Runs a Minute, a song that he originated on Broadway as like an 8-year-old, never recorded. And we taught it to him from a bootleg of his 8-year-old self singing it, and our poor musical director being like, "Oh, I think that's this note," and transcribing. So we've had like a number of those experiences where it's been so exciting because we also always have put all of our material on YouTube that we can,
Mhm.
so it's all out there, and a lot of it is material that people might have not known that now they love or do for an audition, or it just literally never had any recording and now it's on the internet. So we're really proud of that, and we've also barely ever repeated a performer, so we've just had so
Mhm.
many people be part of the concert series.
Well, yeah, there are so many shows out there that nobody knows, except for the rare few. Yeah, because I'm looking at most of these, going, "Yep, have it on vinyl, have it on vinyl." So, and yeah, they've never got any digital copies. A lot of those I had to digitize myself so I could get them on the radio. So I love them. But what is the border? When does it officially become a part of this, or could be considered for this?
Such a good question. So, one of my favorite books is Not Since Carrie, by Ken Mandelbaum, and he defines like a flop, which I sometimes call an underappreciated musical, as it maybe was something that didn't make back its money, 300 performances or less. Those are like two of the big markers,
Yeah.
and so I kind of go by those. But it's, as we know in musical theater, like it's so, like if Thoroughly Modern Millie doesn't make its money back fully on Broadway, but it's the best musical winner and
Yeah.
it ran for 3 years, like, do we count that? Like, no, we don't. So it's really a weird thing where it's sort of like personal compass based. Um, but then what's hard is like there are also shows that were definitely underappreciated musicals, but then later came back in revivals and became more like, celebrated and made money. So it's kind of, some of it is like a decide for yourself based on a number of criteria. It's tricky sometimes.
Yeah, because because I love playing it, because like you said, it's a great opportunity to find new audition material. Like, these are songs
Totally.
nobody's singing, and there's only so many times you can hear whatever it is they're singing in there. So
Totally. And
uh,
there are songs that I've discovered in this that I'm just like, oh my God, like some of our discoveries have just been like, this is a song everyone should be singing in concert kind of thing. And it's been exciting.
yeah, and yeah, I again, one of my passions is just finding these obscure shows. So are you doing another one this year, or when do they get put on? Because I'm personally curious.
No, we went from doing them like every 3 months to kind of every to a year. Like it's kind of varied, and right
Mm,
before the pandemic we were working on our first ever themed one, because we always never liked to have a theme. Actually, we always liked that it was like, oh, you're hearing a song from the 90s and then you're hearing a song from the 40s, and
yeah.
just the variety of it. But I really wanted to do one to honor my hero Hal Prince after he passed away, so we were doing like a special Hal Prince themed edition, which was
Mm,
really inspiring to me, and I hope to others, especially because he obviously did so many hits. And so, like, seeing all of his shows where he swung big and, maybe it didn't run or maybe
yeah.
it didn't make money or for whatever reason, was really interesting. So we did that. It ended up being delayed for, 2 years because of the pandemic, and we did it in the fall last year. And yeah, we definitely plan on doing another edition soon. Honestly, it's been tricky with like the COVID of it all, still being in the midst of the pandemic, to make everything happen at 54 Below and still be as involved with other projects as I'd like to be. So I'm sure there'll be a point in the future where I'm like, oh, now I can go to every Runs a Minute rehearsal, so we can put another one on the calendar. But I think we'll go back to not having a theme. I really love that it can be like just a great variety of material.
I it kind of sucks to be only one person, right? I wish you could divide yourself so you could do everything you want to do, but
Totally.
and then you have time to write books like the Untold Stories of Broadway. How did you decide to write that? And tell us a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so the Untold Stories of Broadway, I was always very obsessed with like the theaters themselves, and
Mhm.
being someone who grew up far away, teaching themselves about Broadway, from Florida. By the first time I walked into the Imperial Theater, I always say that like, oh, like I'm here for Dirty Rotten Scoundrels because that's what was playing when I moved there. But like, oh, Dreamgirls was here, and oh, Pippin was here, and oh, that's where they did this during Drood, and I really was obsessed with the theaters themselves. And then during title of show, when I got the chance chance to like live at the Lyceum every day and like explore backstage and really go like, oh, there's a secret past door, and oh, like this is built like this because it was built in 1903. I became super fascinated by the idea of stories from people who had worked at theaters and like how they were connected. I remember exploring underneath like a dressing room table and finding signatures from like everyone who had worked there for the
Oh,
past
wow.
20 years and been in that dressing room. So it was things like that. And I was thinking like, oh, I want to do like a version of At This Theater, but with people's personal stories and memories. And I kept it on the back burner for a while, being like, oh, this is a book I'll write, you know, when I'm older and have had more experience. And then a couple of years after that, maybe like 4 years after that, would-be publisher came to one of my If It Only Runs a Minute shows, which I also like, you know, write the script of, and here's how we're going to tell all these fun facts, and asked if I wanted to pitch her a book. And I was like, oh, I do have a book idea. And so it was this very new publishing company called Dress Circle that has now published like Seth Rudetsky's books and a bunch of other stuff that's great. And so I pitched it to them, and it turned into this like, oh, we're going to need 6 volumes in order to cover all the theaters, but let's start on volume 1.
Yeah.
And I've done, you know, 300 interviews with different folks, and it's, you know, actors and producers and writers, but also stagehands and musicians and company managers and door people, basically anyone who works like in the Broadway theater itself. So it's been really fun, and it's been really exciting to like shape people's stories over time together based on them having worked in one theater. And you get to tell the stories of specific shows, the stories of specific kinds of jobs. Like it just pulls together a lot of disparate elements. And I was lucky to get to, it was one of the only silver linings of 2020. I had time to write volume 4. So there'll be 6 eventually, but I got to do that. And it's honestly, it's become a different project over time. There's at least 15 interviewees who've sadly passed away since I started the process. And so I still have words of theirs and stories of theirs that like some of which I'm lucky that we've, you know, published and people have gotten to hear them, but also some that haven't come out yet that I have in the vault. So just that responsibility, like I don't take it lightly, of having people's stories and getting to kind of deliver them onward.
I love that you talk to stage hands and door people and things like that, because they are the unsung heroes who have the stories that everybody wants to talk to, you know, the stars or the producer, but it's those people that, you know, keep the machine going. I love talking to them. They probably
Totally.
had some great stories.
Yeah, it's also, I have kind of shaped each chapter so that each theater has its own narrator. And often the narrator is the person who's like the house manager or a door person, or, you know, someone who has spent so much time there, who knows a lot of the stories through the years. And so, yeah, those people do, it's the best stories come from folks who don't get interviewed as often, you know,
Yeah,
and it's really wonderful to talk to them.
that is very cool. Um, Thank you so much for coming on today, Jen, and talking to me. And we could probably talk for another hour on just everything and anything, and just on the musicals that no one knows alone. But thank you so much. Where can people find your book, and where can they find the Jonathan Larson Project and anything else about 54 or anything?
Yeah, people can find my book at good old Amazon. It's usually the easiest way to get it. It is in person at bookstores, but if you go to your local bookstore and it's not there, usually Amazon will always have it. And Jonathan Larson Project you can listen to on all the streaming platforms. Ghostlight Records, as you know, they were part of making the album happen. You can find the album on their website. And 54 Below, I also have to say, over the course of the pandemic, we've finally been able to start a streaming program. So whether you're in New York or not, you know, if you go to 54below.com, we always have, we've been able to stream at least, you know, a fourth of our shows, which is still just a huge number. So check that out if you're in New York or outside New York, and see what artists we have coming up.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations on everything that you've accomplished and everything you're about to, and I look forward to see where everything goes with
Yeah,
what
thank you
you've
for
done.
having me. Thank you for such a lovely chat with someone who also knows all the obscure musicals that I know.
No problem. But before we end this, I always ask 3 questions of my guests just to get to know them even a little bit better. There's no right or wrong answers, though people are judgy. Not me, but the listeners. So question number 1, softball. What creator or team within musical theater has had a great influence on you? No, it could be a composer, lyricist, director, producer, actor, even stage manager. It could be somebody famous or not famous, like a teacher. Is there somebody who's had a big influence on you?
Yeah, I call her my musical theater fairy godmother, but Mana Allen, who has been a mentor and friend to me for many years, she was in the original cast of Merrily and Smile. She's a teacher, and she's someone who I don't think she's ever missed a single "If It Only Runs a Minute" edition. She's just one of those great people that passes on stories and knowledge to the next generation, who has really influenced my life.
Great answer. Great answer. 1 point. Congratulations on that. All right. Question number 2. Now, you know my love of obscure musicals. You have the same thing. You said your favorite is Merrily, right? What is another underappreciated musical that people should know?
One I think about all the time, but it's tricky to tell people to know it because it's so hard to find it. But there's a show called How Do You Do I Love You, which Maltby and Shire wrote when they were just getting started out. They're just getting started.
Mhm.
Some of the songs are in their later, song cycle, starting here, starting now. But How Do You Do I Love You starred Phyllis Newman. It gave Jonathan Tunick his start as an orchestrator. And it's the show that I discovered because I adore Maltby and Shire and their work, and was like, wait, this is like the lost musical. It's about computer dating, but it was written in the 60s.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, and so we did a song from it in Runs a Minute, that you can see that part of it on YouTube, listeners, if you want to check that one out. And all of the material from it, I'm just like, this is so funny. It's like How to Succeed style, but about dating. It's like Maltby and Shire tunes, and they're kind of like, yeah, we wrote it when we were young and we like it, but it was a pathway elsewhere. It's not that great. And I'm like, no, this is the great lost musical. So I always do talk about that one. Try to see if you can find it, kids.
Is there a recording of it, or is it just sheet music,
No,
or if
there's
even that?
I mean, sir, there's non-commercial recordings if you can find them, but no, it was sadly never recorded.
Mhm.
I'm trying to think, Just Across the River, which ended up in Starting Here, Starting Now, is from it. One Step, which is in that, is from. So you can hear some of the songs in Starting Here, Starting Now, but really, it's one of those shows that I keep waiting for it to get rediscovered.
As an offshoot, have you ever thought about putting together cast recordings of these shows that nobody knows or don't have one yet?
I definitely have, and it's been like one of my favorite things to do at 54 Below is when we get to do, like, we did I produced a Rachel Lily Rosenblum and Don't You Ever Forget It, which was another musical that closed in previews, and we did the first time it was ever performed since its final preview in the 70s was on stage at
Oh,
54 Below.
wow.
We put together, this whole reinvention of it. It's been a challenge because, the cast recordings are so hard to make, and even live recordings are so hard to make financially. So
Yeah.
before the pandemic, we were working on a couple of potential projects like that, and we just have not been able to make them happen. But my dream is at some point at 54 Below to record shows like How Do You Do I Love You and Rachel Lee Rosenblum. In any way that they get recorded, though, I'll be happy. If someone raises that money and figures it out before me, I'll be cheering them on.
Well, listeners, there you go. We've got a challenge for everybody out there. Come on, let's get together because I will play it on the station in a heartbeat. Obviously, any cast recordings you can put together. So let's see what we can do with this. I'm going to give you an extra point for that. So 1.5 points for question number 2. All right, question number 3. This is the one that people find controversial. Food in the theater or cell phones in the theater, which is worse?
In the theater, cell phones in theater. Do you know what's so weird? I'm one of those strange people that I'm way more affected by like people being rude sound wise than I am visually.
Okay.
Like I would much rather have someone silently sending a text than loudly talking to their friend. Obviously you don't want either of those things.
Sure.
But like for some reason I'm like I can't hear that lyric or like I missed that line bothers me way more than like a light. Again, I'm not condoning either of them. But in that way, I think it depends on how you're using your cell phone. I'm gonna get 0 points for this answer because I'm cheating. But yeah, like honestly, if you're a person who like flips your phone over to look at the time quickly and it's annoying and you shouldn't do that in the theater, I'm way less annoyed than if you're loudly eating a bag of chips. So like it's just a toss up based on the behavior.
You know what? I would have accepted both are terrible. So you know what? A point anyways. So congratulations. 3.5 out of 3 points. Better than most. So congratulations on that. Jen, thank you again so much for coming on to talk to me um and introducing yourself to the world who might not know you. I know lots of people talked about you and know you in New York because I've heard about them talking about you in all positive ways. That's why I brought you on. But now the rest of the world can get to know you and everything you've
Thank
done.
you. Thank you so much for the lovely interview and such great like insights about all of it.
Awesome. All right. We were just speaking with Jennifer Ashley Tepper here on Be Our Guest on Musical Theater Radio. Tune in next week as we'll be speaking with another guest or guests about their life, love, and passion that is musical theater. I'm your host, as always, Jean-Paul Jovanov. And until next time, I'll see you when I see you.